if you have a Christian who says, look at the trees, and you have a Muslim who says, look at the trees, and you have a Hindu who says, look at the trees, how are we to tell which one of their gods is real based off of them looking at trees?
What's up, guys? It's your boy Jordan. With me, as always, is Jared. Today, since we're coming close to the holidays, we thought we might kind of do a little bit of role playing and talk about some topics that might come up. If you're an atheist or a skeptic, chances are most of your family, if you're in America, are religious. And though it's probably a good idea not to talk about politics, no matter how happy you are right now about that, or religion during Thanksgiving or Christmas, sometimes it comes up anyway.
Yeah.
So we thought we might kind of just go over some things you are likely to hear around the dinner table or in the living room afterwards. This is intended to be a guide to talking to your family, not William Lane Craig, you know? So this is kind of like a layman's view. There are entire libraries full of apologetics and people who spend their entire lives doing nothing but talking about these subjects, but you're not going to be talking to those people.
Yeah.
And chances are the people you're going to be talking about haven't talked to them either.
Exactly, yeah. And you don't have to be an atheist too, I was going to say, to actually know what these topics are and know what the talking points are. Like maybe you're questioning, maybe you're just now starting to doubt. And it's good to know what an atheist thinks or, talks about with this stuff.
That's a good point. This isn't solely for atheists. If you're a Christian, this might kind of inform the conversations you might be planning on having with your relatives and kind of give you a sneak preview as to what the other side sort of thinks. Both Jared and I live in America, and we're both former Christians. So we're coming at this from a Christian perspective, or a Christian culture perspective. So we're mainly going to be framing this in terms of Christianity, but several of these problems are problems regardless of what flavor of theism you have. Yep. So if you come from a Hindu or Muslim family, you can probably find something useful here too.
Yeah. They apply to most religions, except for like really specific claims about Jesus or
right.
Before we dive into it, though, I was gonna do an impromptu word of the day here, and so this episode is brought to you by the ad hominem.
That's a good one especially for this topic.
Yes, because you may find somebody trying to do some ad hominems on your ass when you're having a conversation with them.
You just want to sin.
Yeah. So the ad hominem is basically you're poisoning the well, so to speak. And you can expand on that if you want, Jordan. Like,
ad hominem means to the man.
Yeah.
So if someone makes an argument, rather than addressing the argument, you just talk about how shitty a person is.
Exactly. You're attacking them or...
You're attacking their character in a way that is not relevant to the argument.
Right.
So if I said, well, I don't think that prayer is effective, they say, well, of course you don't think that because you're a dirty, rotten sinner.
Exactly.
Like,
So
that would be an ad hominem. It's not a good thing to do.
Don't do that.
Don't do that. Ideas should be taken on their own merit, not based on who said them. And if someone does it to you, especially if it's your family, that's probably a good time to take a time out.
Yeah. And the reason I brought that one up today was because we want to have some groundwork set before we go into having a conversation with somebody. First and foremost, Jordan and I are always talking about this, but don't be a butthead. Don't get combative with somebody. Like, especially if you're trying to win them over or convince them of an argument, you're never going to be able to do that by being combative or being mean. And the way that you can make sure you're doing that with your conversation is to implement what's called active listening. So repeating back to your person you're having a conversation with, I want to be sure I heard you correctly. Did you say blah, blah, blah? Did I hear you right? Give them a chance to make sure that they know you're listening to them and that you're understanding them, representing them properly.
And utilizing the Socratic method, which is basically asking questions rather than making statements. It's good to as a persuasive technique because people tend to be more engaged if you're kind of thinking with them. And it's also good because maybe you didn't understand them.
Yeah, it's definitely a good way to make sure that you understand their question. So you're not addressing something that they don't represent. So
Right. And at the end of the day, especially since the conceit of this podcast today is you're talking with family or friends or people you care about or at least tolerate.
For the time being.
are forced to tolerate, maybe. The goal of this shouldn't be to show them how stupid they are or to club them over the head with your logic. The goal should be to come to a better, deeper understanding of where you're coming from. Maybe someone will change their mind, maybe they won't, but either way, hopefully you'll come away stronger for the experience.
And you never know when one of these conversations, like Christians always talk about planting seeds, and like one day they'll come back and you'll reap that seed, Well, atheists plant seeds too, and those seeds are called doubt. And I know personally, I've had hundreds of these conversations with people, with fellow Christians when I was a Christian, or atheists, when I was doubting. Like, they all meant something to me. And while I may not have been convinced in that moment, later on, I thought about back to those conversations and realized, oh yeah, that's right, Jordan did say that. So
yeah. So the first two things we're going to talk about are kind of positive cases or things that you as the non-believer or skeptic or your family who's a skeptic will bring to the theist.
Yeah, maybe you're sitting around the table and they go, hey, Jared, so somebody told me that you don't believe in God anymore. Like, why not? And I'd be like, yeah, I'm glad you asked. Let me tell you why.
One of the most common things that both theists and non-theists struggle with when it comes to a divinity is called the problem of evil or the problem of suffering. And basically it's an observation that stuff's really bad.
Yeah.
And, maybe it shouldn't be so bad.
And, the atheist or the skeptical side of that would be like, well, if things are so bad and your God is real, why doesn't he fix it? Why doesn't he cause things to not be so bad?
I think Bart Ehrman put that sentiment best when he said, if God intervenes, why doesn't he intervene?
Yeah.
I think, and this isn't a new thing by any means, Epicurus, who was one of the OG, he was an atheist that didn't really exist in his day, but if he was alive today, I'm pretty sure he'd be an atheist.
Definitely.
He was a Greek philosopher, and he put it this way, as quoted by David Hume: is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he's impotent. If he is able but not willing, then he's malevolent. If he's both able and willing, then from whence cometh evil? If he's neither able nor willing, why call him God?
Yeah, that's a good point. And, some of my earlier conversations I've had with Christians and stuff, like I'll bring this up, but I rephrase it a little bit. I'm like, especially if somebody that I'm talking with has a family, has any children, and you can relate if you have children or, loved ones that you care about. And if something bad were to happen to one of them, there's nothing that you wouldn't do to prevent them from suffering. And this will get into one of the other arguments later, but just the fact that I would do anything to stop my child from suffering, am I better and more loving than the supposed God? It's a common thing.
Right. The difference, the more flippant version is the difference between me and Jesus is if that I could cure cancer, I would.
But don't say that.
Don't say that because that's in jest. Anyways, so this problem is such a big issue. It's a recognized issue. It has its own name in theistic philosophy circles. If you have an answer to the problem of suffering, it's called a theodicy. Which is a fancy word that basically just an explanation for why there's evil. Because we all agree there definitely is. Yeah. So the real question is why. Some of the common ones you might hear is free will. So there's evil because God created us not to be robots, but to be thinking, feeling beings that could make decisions. And some of the times those decisions are bad. Mm-hmm. We make poor decisions and that causes suffering. And it's terrible, but that's the price we pay for having free will.
Yeah. There's several problems with this line of thinking, though. And one of the talking points is to bring up that I like to talk about a lot is the fact that heaven exists in most Christians' theology. And if heaven exists and people go there or people are there, wherever it may be, those people apparently still have free will, and yet it's a place without sin. So God is capable of creating a place where people have free will and there is no sin. So why not just cut out the middleman and let's do heaven here on earth, like the gospel says, like
Hey, we just come right to the
yeah,
end. We come right to the good part. Another thing is that God, the Christian God, the triomni God, the God who's all loving, all powerful, and all knowing,
yeah. So
knows ahead of.
before you do that, the
Sorry.
omni is, omnipresent, omnibenevolent, and
Omnipotent.
omnipotent. Yeah,
Yeah. So God knows ahead of time who's going to commit what sins, in what circumstances. He knows everything. Nothing's a surprise to him. And he knew that prior to creating the universe. So he could have easily, because he's omnipotent, created a universe full of only beings that would have chosen not to sin if that's what he wanted to do. Or at least chosen maybe less bad sins.
right.
Maybe Hitler wasn't necessary,
Yeah. But I think the biggest problem with this line of thought is the fact that free will specifically applies to humans in our actions. So there's this whole other category of suffering and evil, whatever you want to call it, that is not caused by humans. I don't know, think like a typhoon that takes out half of Taiwan, or an earthquake, any kind of natural thing, like maybe, I don't know, coronavirus.
Right. Yeah.
So
Cancer, famine, disease, just the whole history of the world is just one long string of misery. Now, granted, it has been slowly getting better, but you can't chalk up an earthquake to human failings,
right.
basically.
I mean, and that has to do with the fact that this theodicy doesn't address that aspect of free will.
Right. So at best, the free will theodicy is a partial explanation. You have to go to something else. Yep. So speaking of something else, another one you might hear is that, well, it doesn't matter because when we die, if you believed, you're going to go to heaven, and like you're going to be in heaven forever, like forever and ever.
Forever.
So the amount
ever?
of time. Yeah, yeah, for real. And so the amount of time that you suffered on Earth, it's so tiny compared to infinity, So it doesn't even matter. Why worry about it?
Well, there's a couple of things that I would bring up is like, I don't know if I'm going to heaven, first of all. And so like,
well, if there is a heaven, I'm pretty sure I'm not going.
Yeah, well, I can be assured of that too. But who knows? Maybe once saved, always saved. Maybe I already cashed that check,
Yeah, that's true. So, that's true. I'm in the book. Can't take me out, bro.
St. Peter's up there trying to erase it right now.
Yeah. But more than that, though, even if you're going to be better off in the future, like even if you're going to have a future bliss, that doesn't mean that your suffering today isn't real.
Right. And it doesn't equate it either. So like if I stubbed my toe earlier tonight, like, yeah, in the span of my lifetime, one stub toe, not a big deal. But it sure as hell hurts when you stub your toe.
Yeah. It still hurts, If you lose a child here and now, that pain is very real and it's not necessary. So, or at least that's the argument, is it's not necessary.
So, and this kind of gets into one of the ones coming up, but heaven is also used as like a justification, like for like, well, everything will be made right in heaven. So all of the wrongs now are going to be justified or be made right later on.
I mean, yeah, but we could also just like make it right now.
Yeah,
like,
maybe made it so that we never had to make it right to begin with. I don't know.
Right, I don't know.
Just spitballing here.
Right. Another one you might hear is the devil did it. Satan made me do it. You got this evil angel who's working on earth, and man, boy, God would sure love to have a great place, but gosh darn it, Satan just keeps messing it up.
This is one of my favorites, and I've actually had a Thanksgiving, maybe it was Christmas, might have been Christmas. Anyways, it was a holiday, and we were sitting around a dinner table, and I had this conversation with some family members, and I kindly asked them to show me in the Bible where this Satan was, because I knew that it wasn't actually in there, but they weren't able to do it. There's a couple verses in the King James, particularly, that's translated as Satan, but it's really referred to as the adversary. But this character of Satan that most Christians think is like out in the world, like conniving and, whispering in people's ears, getting them to do bad things, doesn't actually exist in the canonical Bible as we have it.
It's tradition that came up later.
Right.
But even if you accept these figures in the Bible that they say are Satan, even if you just buy that, the idea that Satan is behind all suffering is not supported by even the Bible. No. First, all you have to do is look at that poor guy Job. That guy all he was doing was minding his own business, worshiping God, being a good Jew at the time because Christ hadn't come yet. And Satan was like, hey, God, I bet if you screw with that guy's life, he'll leave you. And God said, oh, yeah? And then he proceeds to make Job's life horrible.
Yeah.
Like,
some of the worst
horrible.
stuff.
Yeah.
It'd be worse than like Game of Thrones. Like,
bro, it is terrible. And Satan didn't, unless you think that Satan can trick God, which would have all kinds of problems on its own. Satan didn't cause that. God caused that. So clearly, not all suffering comes from God, or it comes from Satan, rather.
Yeah.
And if God is omnipotent, isn't anything that Satan does like God could stop any of it. So that doesn't really.
Yeah, it totally goes back to the all powerful. Like, if it is Satan, God could just stop him, just like he could stop me or you or any other person from doing something.
Right. And you could tie that to free will, but we've already talked about that. Yeah. So the next one is called educative theodicy, but basically it's the idea that suffering can be good. Like, not all suffering is bad. So if you go to the gym or you work out, you get pain, you suffer, but it's for a higher purpose.
Get your swole on.
Yeah, you get your swole on, Or maybe you're up late studying and that really sucks, but later you get the job you wanted or whatever. Right. So suffering can be good.
Well, there's even pain. Like, for a child to reach up and try to grab the stove, like they may burn their hand, but they learn not to grab the stove anymore, right?
Which is good.
That's good for them.
Yeah.
So.
Right. And so, in a sense, that this could explain some level of suffering. Though you could argue if you didn't have the possibility of getting burned, then you wouldn't need to know not to get burned. But even if this is okay, though, wouldn't it make a lot more sense if you were an ultimately good being? Like, maybe we could just have like a little bit of suffering, just like the minimum amount.
Yeah, exactly. Like, this doesn't really apply to something like cancer, for say. This is something that this logic doesn't make sense to me in terms of like big life things. Like, my wife and kids died in a car crash, like Joe Biden. Like, oh, you could say, oh, but yeah, he learned to overcome that and now he's the president. Well, that still fucking sucks. Like,
yeah. Could he possibly have learned some strength without his wife and child dying horrifically, Or like little Timmy gets leukemia. What is little Timmy learning from that? That life blows?
He's dead. Like, he doesn't learn shit.
He doesn't learn anything. Yeah. So it kind of on a very surface level makes sense because most of the suffering that we experience from day to day is minor stuff that isn't, in the grand scheme of things, that big a deal. But it falls flat when you look at the just the magnitude of awfulness that happens to people.
The next one up is the mystery. Like, so you've heard this said, God works in mysterious ways. Like, you don't know what God's up to, man.
It may seem awful, but we live in the best possible world, even if you can't see it. Like, we can only see this little bit, but God, he's making sure everything's working out.
He's the master puppeteer up there pulling all the strings, and you don't know that when you pull this string here, it moves a string and a cog and a wheel, and next thing you know, boom, cancer's cured. 2020. That's a long ways away, by the way.
The idea is that the universe is very complicated, and even though your broken arm may seem like a terrible thing, you broke your arm, but in every other universe, I don't know, broke both legs or something.
But this one kind of ties into the educative theodicy a little bit, and they'll often combine them. A Christian will say very much the same argument. So,
right. But ultimately, technically, I mean, it's impossible to refute. Like, I lack the knowledge to say that that's not true, right? Which is why some philosophers like Mackey, who's a prominent atheist philosopher, he's conceded that the logical problem of evil is solved. Like, he cannot logically say for certain that we are not in a minimally evil universe. But boy, does it not look like that. Like, at that point, you have to say that every single child who got cancer, every single one was necessary. There couldn't have been one more cured cancer, not one. It just doesn't. I can't say for certain that it's false, but man, it just does not look that way.
Which kind of goes into this next one and this is one of the probably least common and least favored theodicies out there, because it's admitting that God isn't all good, all powerful, or all knowing.
Right. If you just drop those requirements, the problem of evil goes away. The problem of evil or the problem of suffering is only a problem for a God who is all powerful, so he could stop it, all knowing, so he knows how to, and all good, so he would want
Yeah.
to. If you drop any of those, if he's just kind of a jerk, then that's fine. Like it's consistent. If he boy would he want to, but he just doesn't have it, Or man, he tries his best, but he just doesn't. He makes mistakes sometimes.
And that God is more a God of deism. It's definitely not the classical God of Christianity or Islam or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if someone wants to concede that, I'd be happy to take that. But at that point, we're not talking about a traditional theistic God from the major Abrahamic religions.
There is one more possibility, though. Well, there's probably a lot more, but one more that we're going to talk about today, and that is a secular answer. And that's that suffering happens because this world just sucks sometimes. And shit happens, and it would be nice if it didn't, but sometimes it doesn't. And so it's up to us to try to make it better. It's up to us to try to learn from our mistakes and improve. And we're doing that. Sometimes we're not doing it at a pace that's fast enough sometimes, but we are improving. So,
yeah. The secular answer is everything looks like there's nobody in charge because there's nobody in charge.
Which makes more sense to me.
Yeah, I agree.
Segue. Speaking of.
Yes. Speaking of nobody being in charge, the next thing we're going to talk about is divine hiddenness. So both these first two are kind of reasons if someone was like, why don't you believe?
Yeah.
The next one, that's kind of the proactive case, is called divine hiddenness, or basically it doesn't look like there's a God. Specifically, the Christian God is said to want to have a personal relationship with all of his creation, right? He wants to be our divine daddy and, have it. Some people say that Christianity isn't religion, it's a relationship, you know?
I have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ.
Yeah. And I thought I did too. The problem here is that there are definitely people in the world who do not have that personal relationship. God knows who each and every one of them are. He knows what they're thinking, and he knows what he would need to do to convince them.
Right.
If they are a person who would believe and worship God, if they knew he existed, but they just haven't been convinced yet or whatever, he knows exactly what would convince each and every one of them.
And the reason they call it hiddenness is because God could just reveal himself to them to the point where they would have to believe.
Or to the point where, because of his omniscience, because he knows everything, he would know in what way to approach them such that
they would believe.
They would believe. Not forcing them, but just knowing, if I come down in a fiery bush, John will believe that it's me. But Smith, if I come down in the form of his grandfather, whatever, whoever, he could tailor an experience for each and every person and ensure that everyone who's willing to have a relationship has one.
And so if you're on the fence and you're like, okay, I want to believe and God hasn't revealed himself to me, or I'm not convinced that he's real, then what do you do there? You want to believe, but he didn't reveal himself.
Right. Some flavors of Christianity and other religions answer this basically by saying that God doesn't want to have a relationship with everyone.
Calvinism.
If you're a Calvinist, if you're a Calvinist, some people are born to be damned, and that seems pretty awful, but I mean, that is one answer.
You're not one of the elect. Or so was it Jehovah's Witnesses? There's only 250,000 people are going to make it. Sure are a lot more Jehovah's Witnesses than
not even them are going to make it. Or another one that's been hit to me is that God does approach each and every person who wants to have a relationship with him. So he hasn't approached you, and he doesn't in the future. There's always the future possibility. But assuming he doesn't, that is evidence that you did not want to have a relationship with him.
Ad hominem.
Right. So, and this is a little bit arrogant, because if I tell them I'm the only one who knows my thoughts, right? I'm telling you, as the skeptic to the believer, that I would believe in God if I had sufficient evidence. I just don't. And if someone else is saying I would be willing to worship God, I just don't know that he exists. You have to believe that each and every skeptic or each and every secular person who says that is lying.
Yeah. But this one,
every single one.
This one's personal to me because I spent months like 6 months fasting, not like fasting for 6 months, but I went through periods of fasting. I went through periods of prayer. I went through periods of devotion, asking God to reveal himself to me when I was going through my doubt at the end of seminary. And I know we've talked about this before, but it gets back to that divine hiddenness. Like, this is one of the main reasons why I ended up stop believing. Like,
there's no way I can prove to you that I'm being sincere when I say that I just need evidence. I can't prove to you that that's the case. But it seems, I don't know, it seems like a big leap to think that all these billions of people, each and every single one of them is a liar.
Yeah.
And you have a little bit of an advantage if you're talking to one of your family who knows that you're a decent person.
Correct. Or knows you when you were a devout Christian. Like,
right. And so this, I think that might hit home there because they know that you are generally sincere, hopefully.
Yeah.
Those first two are kind of the positive cases, the things that the skeptic might bring to answer, like, why don't you believe? The next ones that we're going to talk about are on the other way. So if you use that Socratic method and ask, well, why do you believe? Why are you convinced? Here's some things
may come up with it.
You might hear.
They might say, now most Christians aren't going to put it this way, but it's called Pascal's wager. And that's because Blaise Pascal came up with this grand wager a long time ago. And we can look it up to say what it exactly means. But the most people aren't going to phrase it like this. They're going to say, well, what if you're wrong? Like,
yeah,
what if you're wrong?
Exactly.
And then,
right.
That's a big question for some people.
So the way that Pascal formulated it was either God exists or he doesn't. And if you believe in God and he doesn't exist and you die, nothing happens. You've lost nothing. But if you believe in God and he exists and you die, you get infinite rewards. And on the other side, if you don't believe and he exists, you go to hell forever. But if you don't believe and he doesn't exist, you get nothing. So basically, you have nothing to gain and everything to lose by not believing in God. So the rational thing to do is believe in God.
It makes sense when you don't think about it.
Right. So, and like Jared said, they're probably not going to phrase it the way Pascal did, but that's what the thrust of the argument is. It makes several assumptions. The first is that there's no cost for believing.
Yeah. I don't know. I enjoy my Sundays off.
Yeah. And I like having 100% of my money.
Yeah.
So
I mean, those are two small things, but I mean, that's a cost.
Yeah.
Like,
anytime you spend devoted to this God that doesn't exist, that's a cost.
Now, there's one more though. What if you're wrong about which God you pick?
Right. And for this, I think that the best formulation of that was by the 20th century philosopher Homer Simpson.
Great. Homer's
who
classic.
Said, right. But Marge, what if we pick the wrong religion and every time we go to church, we're just making God madder and madder?
Yeah. So, I mean, you could literally turn Pascal's wager right back around on the person asking you that question. And it really shows you the flaw in Pascal's wager.
Yeah. So what if you're wrong? What if you pick the wrong God?
Yeah.
What if, it's the Hindu gods that are real? Or what if it's, Thor? Or what if it's some God that we don't even know about? And he would rather you have an honest disbelief. But if you pick the wrong one, that really pisses him off. Like,
maybe the atheist God is the best God.
Yeah.
Like the God that wants atheists.
Yeah, maybe he designed the universe to look like there's no God, and anyone who gets that wrong, it's like, bro. So yeah, basically, it's just it makes sense if you already believe. Mm-hmm. So those are probably the best ones. The ones we've covered so far are probably the highest brow ones. But the next one,
yeah, this one,
not necessarily the most common ones though.
This one probably is the most common, actually. Out of all the ones I've ever heard, and from some fairly high people in religious circles, I'm not going to name any names, but look at the trees, man.
What about babies, bro?
You ever seen a baby's hand?
What about the miracle of childbirth?
I don't know. I was in the birthing room.
It's pretty disgusting.
I almost passed out twice.
Yeah. So basically, this is just an appeal to wonder. Like, the universe is amazing, and it seems perfectly designed for us, and babies are awesome. So doesn't that mean there has to have been a God who put it all there for us?
And this is like entry level apologetics, because this gets expanded into ID, apologetics,
Intelligent design.
Intelligent design, and so
or creationism,
all that stuff. But this is just like the boom entry level. And what's interesting about this one is like it's really convincing to the person asking you that question. It's like, well, how can you look at a baby and not believe in God? Because to them, it's just like boom, so apparent.
Right. So it's a little harder to unpack this one in a way that's, I don't want to say kind, but not condescending.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it is an emotion. It's at its foundation an emotional argument. It's an appeal to emotion. And so you can recognize that as an atheist, I feel wonder looking at the universe or holding my child's hand or everything. If we're going to figure something out, if we're going to try to look at what caused something we're seeing, you don't start by assuming it was like a mysterious race of aliens or a shadow government. You start with the simplest stuff and then work from there, And so if you can have an explanation for why we feel the way we do about babies or why trees exist that doesn't require a deity, it doesn't make them any less amazing. If anything, I think it's even more amazing, personally.
Yeah. One of the things that I like to do with this is actually turn it back around on the person who's asking me this question. And I'll say something like, I agree with you. Trees are amazing. I love green. Green's one of my favorite colors. It's amazing. But if you have a Christian who says, look at the trees, and you have a Muslim who says, look at the trees, and you have a Hindu who says, look at the trees, how are we to tell which one of their gods is real based off of them looking at trees? Like, can we come to a conclusion of whose God is real or not real based on that question?
Yeah. If a Hindu and a Muslim and a Buddhist and a Christian can all look at these things and all of them conclude that their God exists, they cannot all be right. But they could all be wrong.
They very well could be. I like to turn it back around and ask a question. I might not go with a bunch of options, but the same thing. You could do that. The Socratic method, just ask the question back and see what you get.
Yeah. If a person from Saudi Arabia described an oasis he came to one day and used that as evidence for Allah, would you find that convincing?
Yeah. Probably not.
Probably the answer is no.
Which kind of leads us into a next one, which is miracles.
And the power of prayer, which historically speaking, has been the biggest selling point of Christianity specifically. But religions in general are miracles. Anyone you talk to will probably have a story of a miracle, not necessarily one that they experienced, but their sister's cousin's hairdresser's dog experienced. You can always go the route of asking for evidence, and probably the evidence won't be very good. Probably it'll be as simple as someone they trusted told them, and you don't want to call that person a liar.
Right. This is another case where asking the question, be like, all right, so if a Christian prays and gets a prayer answered, or a Christian experiences a miracle and a Muslim experiences a miracle, prays and gets their prayer answered, how do we know which one was God doing it?
There are examples of miracles and prayers being answered in every single religious tradition. All of them have some example of it. And so if you can use the same piece of evidence for all of these different conclusions, and it must not be a very good piece of evidence.
Yep.
Now, I've heard the response of, well, those other ones are Satan or like evil spirits. They sent to deceive you. But if you can try to coax them, use the Socratic method to kind of coax them out of their own worldview a little bit. Like, okay, I understand that you think that your miracles are a divine being and everyone else's are an evil being. But try to imagine you had been born in India. Don't you think that it's at least possible you might think that your experiences are the divine ones and that the Christians' experiences are the evil ones? And how would you know? How can you tell the difference?
It's just trying to put them in different shoes, taking them out and doing it in a respectful way and asking that question. It could be difficult sometimes. This one's a hard one to actually respond to in a conversation, because sometimes they're very personal. And then sometimes you're basically calling them a liar. And it's hard to call somebody a liar to their face and be kind.
Right. I'm typically when someone brings me their miracle story, I assume that they believe that they saw what they believe they saw. Basically, I assume they're being honest with me. Though if you put a gun to my head, I'd have to admit that them lying is more likely than the laws of physics suddenly stopped working. But that's not going to go over very well, and it's not very kind. You don't need to. Right. So why be a dick? Assume they're being honest, and then, but what's the next thing? Everyone makes mistakes. Mm-hmm. You just because you thought you saw a miracle doesn't mean you did. And it's important to remember that none of these miracles, at least I feel like I would have heard of it if someone's leg spontaneously grew back, or a dude was cut in half and then, in front of a whole hospital staff, he sewed himself back together. Those kind of miracles would be really, really hard for me to explain.
They would be.
That might do it for me. But it's never something like that. It's always miracles that are just so happen to be something that could have happened by chance.
Yeah. And the other thing you could do is just be like, hey, that's really interesting. I think I need to look into that a little more before I can give you my opinion on it, and just table it. That's always a good thing to do in that scenario. So this last one here is one that gets brought up quite a lot, but it's a tricky one. But most people will present it as like, but the Bible, like God's word to us, like I know because the Bible tells me so, or something like that. Like, and most of their arguments go back to the Bible. So
I stand on the word of the Lord.
I stand on the book of the word of God, the Bible.
Yeah. And so another way it's sometimes phrased is, why should I believe man when, man's records? Why should I believe man's science when the person who was there told me what he saw?
Right.
God was there at the beginning of time, and he's been there the whole time, so why shouldn't I believe what he says? Now, you could go the route there of, well, how do you know? Because other religions have their holy books, and they think that they are the inerrant word of God, so which inerrant word of God should we be using?
Yeah.
And isn't it convenient that you just so happen to have been born in the right one?
Mm-hmm. What this one can be very circular too, and you have to be careful of that, because the Bible itself says that it is inerrant. We'll use that word, or perfect. So like 2 Timothy 3:16.
All scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness.
Yeah. And so this one is if somebody went to Sunday school a lot and knows their Bible verses, like I was a speed demon in Bible verse trivia, like I could get there. Anyways, they might know this verse, and they'll use this verse to try to prove that everything in the Bible is, God's word and inerrant. So, but it gets back to what you were saying, like, how can we tell?
How do we know?
Yeah.
And if the Bible is the method by which this omnipotent, omniscient God shows and spoke with us, considering it was written by a perfect being, supposedly, sure seems to cause a lot of confusion.
Yeah.
Because there are thousands of Christian denominations, and each one is sure that they have the right interpretation.
A lot of them are created because they thought they had the right interpretation and the other guy didn't.
Right. As Matt Dillahunty is fond of saying, if you want to hear what's wrong with the First Baptist Church of Memphis, you go to the Second Baptist Church of Memphis.
The other thing what's interesting about the Bible is God's word. It's like, why did he choose the written word? Like,
yeah. So that's another really interesting point, because if I were an omnipotent being
and you knew everything that's going to happen in the future,
I knew everything.
85-inch Samsung QLED TVs. I mean, come on.
Right. But like, I could make a perfect word of God. Like I've heard some pastors say flippantly, well, do you want God to come down and correct every time a scribe makes an error? Well, yeah. Like, why not? He's God. He can totally do that. Like, it's okay. He is omnipotent. He can do anything.
God's first attempt at writing or getting a human to write out his word was on a stone tablet that the dude dropped and broke, and he had to make another one. It's like,
right. Like, clearly humans are going to screw this up. And like, but there's so many other things God could do. He could have every Bible could be a set of blank pages, and when you open it up, it's the words you need to hear right then.
Christians do that anyways, by the way. They just flip open a random verse, boom. Oh my gosh, look at my fortune cookie saying for the day.
Yeah, right. So God is perfectly capable of communicating directly to you. And it's not like it's against some kind of cosmic rule. He, according to the Bible, did it all the time.
Yeah.
It just so happens he stopped doing it as soon as we got cameras.
Divine hiddenness.
Right.
Or if God communicates with you and has a relationship with you, he could just feed the thoughts into your brain. Just like you just know that knowledge. Like,
could come out of the womb with the whole Bible in your brain.
A calf comes out of the womb and knows to get up and follow its mom everywhere and eat grass. Like, I could know the whole scripture in my.
Yeah.
Anyways, don't. First of all, don't say these things to the person you're talking to.
Don't. Yeah. It's just us chickens here, so we're being a little sarcastic. But yeah, basically the point is that the Bible is flawed. It appears as if it was made by humans. Mm-hmm. And while you might say that God used these humans to communicate his word, and he could have done that, he didn't have to. And it would have made things a lot better in terms of like us being able to follow God in the way he wanted us to if he had communicated more clearly. Mm-hmm. Not just in the things that he said, but in the things he didn't say. Why did it take us thousands of years to figure out not to own other human beings as property?
Yeah. Why didn't Jesus say, hey, you should probably wash your hands? Like, that's a simple one.
Hey, yeah, boil your water before you drink it. I know it seems weird, but trust me.
You're not going to want to get that dysentery. So.
Right. There's just so many things that if it were in fact written by someone or inspired by someone who had infinite knowledge and cared about us, it sure seems like he left a lot of things out. There's a reason why people often have to bend backwards to fit the Bible into their current day morality. Jesus appears to endorse slavery. Now, he doesn't say that slavery is good, but he says that the slave should obey their master. Now, as a matter of biblical history, probably the real Jesus said that because he thought the world was going to end in the next 10 years, and so it didn't matter. Yeah,
he's like, you guys are going to get, this goes back to the heaven one, like, you're going to get yours in heaven, everything will be all right. Just
hold out.
Couple more days, you'll be good. I'm going up to heaven.
Right.
It's all good.
Yeah. But it would have been super easy for God to say, instead of spending 4 commandments saying don't make idols and don't worship on Sunday, but you could have said, hey, don't own people's property. Just don't, and raping, don't do that either. So
the slavery ones is always a go-to for a lot of atheists, but it's a go-to for a reason, because it's a very clear example, and it's in Exodus 21. If you want to read those lines of scriptures, we don't have to go over them here, but it's very clear that these things are written in a way that's almost irrefutable, that God was endorsing slavery and giving instructions that we would consider heinous today.
Right. And I think, so we've kind of strayed afield, but this brings to what'll be our final point, for me at least. Even if I knew that the Christian God existed, I would believe. If I was given evidence, I would believe that God existed. But unless I was also given evidence that the Christian God is very different from what I understand him to be, I would not worship him, because he seems to be kind of a douche.
Yeah.
He endorses slavery. He murders people left and freaking right.
Genocide. That's the Old Testament, bro. That's the Old Testament.
He committed genocide several times. He told people to take the babies out of their hands and dash their heads on the rocks. And I know if you're talking to someone who's sophisticated, that was like war symbolism, whatever. But you know what? Screw that. If this is actually that's fine. If it's just the writings of some human being who had the morality and sensibility of a Bronze Age peasant, that's fine. But that's not what it's supposed to be. This is supposed to be the perfect word of a holy God. I shouldn't have to explain morality to him. And I don't care what you did 2,000 years later. If in 4000 BC you committed genocide, that's it. Like, you're done.
Yeah, let's not bring up Hitler, but let's say Hitler comes back in 1800 years, 1900 years. Anyways, Hitler comes back 2,000 years from now, and all of a sudden starts doing really good stuff. Are we gonna be like,
turn the other cheek, guys, and you know what? You should really love your neighbor and everything. And I'm going to be like, hey, aren't you Hitler?
Yeah, that's Old Testament. World War II. Don't worry about that.
That was the Third Reich. We're the Fourth Reich, man.
Yeah. Anyways, what it boils down to is just you can have these conversations with people, have some talking points, but don't get super sophisticated with them. Ask questions, be polite, be respectful.
You're not going to impress anyone by pulling out your $20 words that you read in the Encyclopedia of Philosophy. You know?
The other thing you don't want to do is if you're a newfound atheist or somebody who's just starting to doubt, it may seem like everybody else wants to hear all this newfound knowledge that you had and wants to know that there is no God. And you want to go out there and tell everybody because guess what? You just hit the jackpot and you want to share the winning numbers with everybody. They don't want to hear it.
Yeah, probably nobody there cares.
Yeah. So don't go in there and be like, yo, hey, let's not pray for Thanksgiving this year, okay? Because guess what? No God.
Right. If your aunt wants to say grace over Thanksgiving, please do not jump up and say you refuse to pray because you're an atheist. Don't be a dick. Just
keep your eyes open. Look at everybody else. Just get some good food.
When I'm at my aunt's house and they do the grace, you know what I do? I just stand there quietly and respectfully, as I would for any other tradition I didn't particularly care for.
Yeah.
Bottom line, just be cool.
Just be cool, man.
So that's our show, guys. If you liked what we had to say, check us out on Facebook. If you didn't like what we had to say, do it anyway, and you can tell us in vivid detail exactly why we're wrong. Be sure to link to every Christian apologist who's ever walked the face of the earth. If you are listening to us on Stitcher or on iTunes, whatever place you got this podcast, leave us a review, whatever your honest review is, because that helps other people find the podcast, and so you can share this joy with everyone.
Have a good time with your family and your friends over the holidays. Have some good conversations. If you give them a reason, make sure it's a reason to doubt.
See what you did there.
Yeah. Big milestone, Jordan. We hit 1,000 downloads for the podcast just last week. So
sweet.
That doesn't seem like a lot, but that's a big milestone. I think we should celebrate that. So
yeah. So for whatever reason, some quantity of people thought that we were worth listening to 1,000 times, or they clicked on it by accident and then
these guys are stupid.
I thought this was the rap band.
Yeah. Because there's a rap. Yeah, I saw that when I was looking. I was like, oh my gosh, wait.